President Trump wasting no time after being sworn into office, launching a barrage of executive orders. Joining us right now on What to Expect is former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He is the chairman of the Alpha Institute. And Kevin, we already had Brian Moynihan on this morning from Bank of America in Davos. He said the difference this time, he was in Davos 8 years ago when President Trump was sworn in for his first term. And at that point, the international community was kind of freaking out, not knowing what to expect. He says now we kind of know who Donald Trump is. But the one thing that everyone is saying is, wow, they are ready to go. They're already signing things and putting things into action. And maybe that is what the world is kind of reacting to this morning.
I think the world and even the country, I mean, if you sit back, it doesn't matter whether you support the president or not, he is best prepared to do this job right now, even with the way the world looks, because he's already done the job once, so he knows what to expect, and then he departed. So he watched the world. You have time to reflect and see, where should I have moved faster? He is going to move faster than the House and the Senate. He is going to push them. He's going to be the leader of both those houses. I mean, think for what he just did on the executive order. That's going to move the economy right now, because repealing the regulation, the people that he'd put in, Howard Lutnick and others, people who know this economy, just that decision-making process and the stability there. And he's already bringing the leaders. He's bringing the bicameral in. He has a strategy of what he wants to get done. And he knows he only has 4 years. And really, if you study presidential history, you get about a 9-month honeymoon. With President Trump, they always try to work against him. But he's more popular today than he has been at any time in his political career. And if you just watch the swearing in, the people around him, these are the titans of the economy of the American. Every world leader would want one of them in their country. He's going to use the synergy of that to make the economy stronger here.
How do you think that relationship is going to work? We saw the CEOs who were there yesterday, innovators, leaders on these points. How will that synergy work? How will the economy change as a result of that relationship?
I think whoever captures AI and quantum has advantage, and every country is fighting for it. But if you want to capture that, you first have to have energy. You can't have AI without having the energy policy right. But energy plays more than just into that. When you let unshackle America, what we have in our energy, it helps our allies, but it also hurts the Russian economy, too. So it makes us stronger, makes our enemies a little weaker, and gives us a very stronger point and puts us further ahead when it comes to AI policy.
To unlock energy and make it work for AI, it's a lot more than just drill, baby, drill. It's building the grid.
You have to look at our entire grid. It can't be one form of energy. This is what people get wrong. You can't pick one or the other. So you got to have permitting reform.
Right.
And you got to have pipelines. You've got to take the entire grid and you have to double it. And that's a major accomplishment to try to happen. And if you do that, you're really setting up for the next 20, 30 years, but you're propelling the ability to have AI here. Look, those data centers are only going to go to the places that energy is less expensive and the capability for providing it.
Kevin, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because you know Congress so well, because you understand how this all operates, is the legality of what he signed into place with the 75-day extension for TikTok. I thought you were allowed to have a 90-day extension at the president's reasoning for doing that if there was a bid in place, a true bidder. Do we know how this works, or what he can
think
and can't do
about
on
this.
that
I mean, this again shows the difference between Biden and a Trump presidency. Here's Biden, the president of the United States, has a bill and just lets it go. Doesn't make a decision on that. You know, if you're playing a basketball game, and a few seconds to go, Biden's the person who doesn't want the ball. Trump's the individual who give me the ball. So give me 75 days to look.
Although I think people would have been furious if he tried to do something and make his decision on it that was counter to something President Trump wanted to do a day later.
Well, if you're president of the United States and you're afraid to make a decision, don't become president.
Although Trump just came in and changed everything.
He had the time before.
I think President Trump would come in and do what he wanted to do.
Yeah, but he had the time beforehand to make a decision. He didn't, and Congress voted. What really Trump is doing is giving himself time, really look at the situation.
But can he? I don't understand the...
Yes, because this factor.
Yeah.
Trump dealt with this in the first, and he looked at where can we store it. TikTok can continue, worried about the data. Where can I store it? He has a better knowledge of it. I think there's enough people out there, too. He could put it together in the time period. And worst case scenario, if he's about to put something together and he's coming along the 75 days, he has the power to make I think the House and the Senate would react and give him a little longer.
Okay, so this is, you think that this is having Congress who will then go along with what he wants to do?
Look, the president is so powerful at this moment in time, he could get Congress to do what he wants to have happen.
I think Andrew has a question, too. Andrew?
Hey, Kevin, we got Bill Ford, who is on the board of ByteDance, parent company of TikTok, who's going to be joining us, actually, in just a little bit. And I just want to go back to this point that you were making with Becky, which is, and I'm confused, to be honest with you, about it, because clearly Congress has a view that this company is a national security threat, given its ties to China. Do you think there's a possibility, even over the next 90 days, and there's questions about the legality of those 90 days to begin with, but that a deal will be struck that effectively allows the Chinese in any way to continue to control the algorithm? And the reason I ask is it appears that almost under any circumstance that President Trump would like to find a solution. And the question is, he may be willing to find a solution that allows it to continue to operate the way it's operated before, no?
I think it's hard to allow that to continue that way. I think what you're going to see, could the Chinese investors still be a part of it? Yes. But is there a majority owned by America? Is there a database kept in America? A lot of that was discussed prior. I think it would be very hard to allow it to continue exactly the way it is today with this Congress. This Congress has already taken a vote about this and going forward. So there has to be some modification.
The Supreme Court has upheld the law.
Yes, and the Supreme Court. So not only do you have it legislatively, you have the judiciary. Now you're just dealing with the executive branch. It has an ability to extend it, but they can't do it forever.
Kevin, how would you feel if, in fact, somehow Elon Musk becomes either a majority owner of it or even a minority owner of it, given his close ties to the president and his ownership of X?
Well, look, I would not be opposed at all if Elon wanted to do part of that, because Elon stands up for the First Amendment. I like that idea. I would like to see America have that data kept inside. I'd like to know how that algorithm works. TikTok performs differently in China than it does in America. Why do they limit, and what do they educate in China with it, and what do they do in America with it? There's a reason why that bill passed. There's a reason why there's a concern here about TikTok, and it won't sustain itself exactly the way it is today because the courts and the House have made a decision.
But is this now a negotiation chip in a broader conversation with China about things we want from them and beyond? Because that's certainly what it feels like.
The great thing about President Trump, he thinks as a business person everything's a negotiation. So it's not on a single subject when you go in to negotiate. That's why he uses tariffs to actually secure our border and get fentanyl away. He is good at this and utilizing it for a stronger base.